A couple of weeks ago, we covered the most outwardly dangerous emotion in existence, anger. This week, we're discussing the most inwardly dangerous emotion in existence, sadness. And why is sadness so dangerous? Well, sadness is one of the only emotions that can snowball on itself to create a worse situation than where it started. Today, we learn about how that works within you so that we can fix it. Hang on, because here we go. Welcome to the I Am Podcast, where we discuss all the questions about spirituality and inner peace that you ever wanted to ask, and where we learn the secrets of humanity and divinity through a better understanding of both. I am your host, Sean Webb. Spirituality, in plain terms, is the search for the portion of God within us. You know, so many people think that God is everywhere at all times, yet they balk at the idea that if God is indeed everywhere, that must then include that God is also within you, which by default is part of everywhere, right? Oh, no, can't think that. God is everywhere else, but inside me. God stops at my skin, damn it. And that is one of the lies that limits us from finding that awesome spark within us that then reveals our true purpose and that awesome, limitless, fearless spirit within us that can do anything. And so finding it, finding that spark, finding that spirit within is not only what all the world's religions are all about, but when we find it, it grants us a complete and lasting inner peace and also a profound understanding of our human existence and the portion of God within us. But in truth, finding that awesome inner self isn't very easy. There are a ton of inhibitors and distractions that stand in our way of discovering our awesome spiritual self within. And so to be prepared to identify those inhibitors and distractions, we need to learn about them. Because there are forces within you that actually actively work against your attaining a higher spirituality. And that's why we have the Body, Mind, Spirit 101 series. It's the place where we learn the basics of what stands in our way of divine understanding and a lasting inner peace. It's here that we cover the basics that we need to have a common vocabulary so as to be able to make your life awesome in future episodes. This is episode 13, and if you haven't seen episodes 2 through 12, I highly suggest you watch them so that you don't get lost in this episode and that you get the most from it. To review, in episodes 2 through 12, we introduced the body, mind, spirit model. Then, we dove right into a better understanding of the mind, discussing the four components that make up the emotional influence system. And then we started discussing how these four components explain and make up these negative emotions out here. All of these things being stuff that blocks us from our inner discovery. And again, why is this stuff important? Well, because the fact is that if we break just one of these four components right here, all these distractions, these negative emotions, they go away. And the removal of these distractions helps us more easily uncover that awesome divine presence within us that God put there for us to find. Now, as always, you can get these diagrams for free in PDF form at iamspirituality.com. And so today, after understanding how the emotional influence system works, we get to discuss sadness and how it's defined by the model and how everyday examples prove out our new definition is accurate. All negative emotions are a result of an imbalance in the equation of emotion, and more specifically, are the direct result of some type of attack on the list of stuff that your mind thinks is you, otherwise known as the ego. As we discussed earlier, perceived external attacks result in anger. Perceived internal questions of valuation result in fear and worry. And this week's emotion, sadness, is the reaction that is the result of the mind admitting an internal devaluation to the ego. So now let's officially define sadness. The official definition is that sadness is the emotion that results in an internally sourced devaluation of the ego. Plain and simple from a scientific perspective. In everyday terms, though, sadness is the result of the mind itself taking something off the ego list that it doesn't want to take off the ego list. And as usual, let's cue some examples. What is a very common sad situation that we can start with? Let's say grandma dies. Grandma is something or someone that your mind attaches to that becomes an extension of you. So grandma falls within the walls of the ego. Grandma dies. This devalues your ego from the inside. Your ego is now less than it was yesterday. If you knew Grandma well and you loved her and you were very attached to her, you'll feel a deep sadness and you wind up crying throughout her entire funeral. But now let's say your grandma lived in another country and you never really knew her that well and you never got to interact with her, so your level of attachment was much less. The result is that the sadness is much less severe. So what happens is that your sadness is generated because your mind is forced to remove something from your definition of your world, Grandma, that it doesn't want to give up. Because if your mind did want to give up Grandma and take her off your ego list, like you never really liked Grandma and maybe she was a hateful person all the time, you could actually be happy when she croaked. Okay, so let's look at another common example. Let's say a relationship ends in your life. Divorce, breakup, you lose a very close friend to some sort of silliness. You get sad. The reason you get sad is that the ego includes within itself other people that you're attached to, just like Grandma was part of your world, your spouse or significant other or friend was also part of your existence. And when you lose that person, it yanks out a few things from your ego that you weren't expecting or don't want to see go. First, you have the presence of that person in your everyday life, or how you thought of that person if you don't see them every day. Next, you have the relationship portion of your existence with that person. The portion of your life that was the enjoyment of interacting with that person is a portion of your mind's understanding of you, so when you lose that person, you wind up losing that relationship also. Then there's the status that person brought to your egoic understanding. I am a wife/husband. I am a girlfriend/boyfriend. I am a friend to so-and-so. That's part of the laundry list of your ego, and that gets removed from your ego's list by your mind. And so because your ego is now less than it was, otherwise known as an egoic devaluation, you feel the sadness generated by your mind as a reaction to it. Okay, so last simple example. Let's say someone you care about points out something not so flattering about you, like maybe that you need to lose a few pounds. Boom! I mean, it's like one thing to think it, right? But seriously, did they just say that out loud at Thanksgiving in front of everyone? Just damn. And if you get sad when they make that statement, then a few things are happening in your mind. First, the idea that you're beautiful just the way you are is getting pulled off of your list, right? Which is why also you can be angry and sad at the same time. Because remember, anger is the reaction to an external attack on your ego. So they could be saying that you aren't beautiful just the way you are, which causes the anger. And then you could be believing that you aren't beautiful just the way you are, which starts to cause the sadness. Then on top of that, there's a separate idea that you would love that your friends or family think that you're beautiful just the way you are, which gets removed from your mind's understanding at that moment, which piles on to the sadness. And then there's the devaluation of the relationship between you and whoever said it, which can pile on top of that sadness and make it even worse. And are we ignoring the big issue? Notice I didn't say the big elephant in the room. That at the moment you are then reminded again that although you have a preference that your body be thinner, that it isn't. And because you don't want to give up that thought, every time you are forced to face that fact in mirrors, in buying larger clothes, and when looking at the numbers on the scale, and with your doctor telling you every time you come in, you know, this extra weight's going to cause you some health complications, all those things make you sad every time one of those things occurs, because your mind is forced to give up the idea that you're thin over and over and over and over again, which winds up making you sad a lot. And we all know what happens when we get sad a lot. It starts to spiral into mild then severe depression. So let's talk about that for a second. Science knows a little bit about depression, but they also are missing quite a bit when it comes to its causes. Today, science assumes that it's a chemical imbalance in the brain that causes a lot of the depression that exists. And so you go to the doctor and they treat the chemical imbalance with Prozac or Zoloft or some other pill, when in reality, the chemical imbalance may be a symptom of the problem and not the cause of it. I mean, don't get me wrong. There is no doubt that depression is a form of mental illness. But from that standpoint, sadness is also a mental illness. And the reality is that depression is a sadness that has snowballed into a person's definition of self. Let me explain. Sadness is the emotion that results from an internal devaluation of the ego. And so what happens in a situation where the sadness is caused by a chronic situation, let's say that a person's preference is that their body be thin and the extra weight on the body is constantly reminding them that is not the case. So their mind is constantly having to give up the idea of thin from its ego list, which causes a constant sadness. And what happens is that the constant instances of sadness about their weight starts to create a constant state of sadness, otherwise known as a mild depression. Now, here's where sadness becomes a real bastard. The sadness and mild depression that results from the equation of emotion in this case starts to seep back into the ego itself. You start to identify with being that sad or depressed person, and it starts to become who you are in your mind. And that feeds right back into the equation of emotion, because your preference for yourself is that you not be sad and that you not be depressed. But you are. And because that's an internally sourced evaluation again, that sadness and depression, in turn, causes even more sadness and depression. Now, in science, we call this a degenerative loop. It's where the result of an issue adds on to the issue, making it a bigger and bigger issue every time it gets processed. And this is how severe depression starts to occur. And this is why it takes an intervention, sometimes drugs, sometimes other therapies, to be able to pull someone out of their depression by chemically altering their brain or by altering their conscious thought patterns. Because at that point, the brain is generating chemicals that do make things worse, right? They make your outlook worse, they make your health worse, and those chemicals can keep you in that depression. But that said, the depression situation isn't necessarily caused by the chemical imbalances in the first place. The chemical imbalance is rather a symptom of the problem. So when you get a pill from the doctor, you got to stay on it oftentimes. It's like having a cold and treating the symptoms but never getting rid of the cold. You're still sick. The symptoms may go away, but the illness is still there. And so you wind up taking some pills for a while, and then something happens that helps your depression. Something causes you to think of your life getting better, a new relationship, a new job, you lose a little weight maybe. But what's happening here? The changes in your life have helped you change your outlook on life, which then quells the depression where you can get off the pills. But the problem wasn't the chemical imbalance to start, it was how you were seeing things. And it was how the sadness in your life started running out of control and becoming a degenerative loop. The issue that initially caused the sadness and the depression was the emotion in your mind. And it doesn't have to be weight that sets your sadness into a spiral. With women, they're dealing with all kinds of issues where they can't measure up in life. There are the social expectations of being caregivers to the family and friends and creating a good home environment, which is in direct contradiction to the messages of being powerful and independent and creating a career for themselves. So there are a lot of opportunities for sadness there, because really, who could ever manage to satisfy all of those roles? And that's a super tough situation. Then in men, they have this provider and breadwinner stress that's in this tough economy not even easier. And then sexual performance issues, emotional support and caring for their significant other and family, sharing in the domestic responsibilities when they didn't grow up that way, right? Sometimes that provides opportunities for failure, which results in an internal devaluation when they fail. And from here, we can imagine how tough it is for returning soldiers who have lost a limb or functionality of their bodies. Their mind is forced to give up a portion of their body, the functionality and activities that that portion of the body allowed them to do previously, the image of how they see themselves, the image of how they perceive that others see them. I mean, how many opportunities for the mind to be forced to give up something on the ego list does that situation provide? And that's a prime opportunity for depression, because you can't exactly fix the loss of a limb. That keeps nagging at you. Any chronic sadness opportunity results in depression. Depression is the #1 diagnosed health issue in the US right now. Odds are that a large chunk of you watching this are, have been, or will be someday on antidepressants at some point. But you don't necessarily have to be, because the fact is that sadness and the subsequent depression are caused by the operation of the emotional influence system. And the fact is that when we break one of the components, sadness and depression can no longer exist in your life. And I know that sounds crazy, but I've done it. Other spiritual masters have done it. Pema Chodron, Thich Nhat Hanh, Eckhart Tolle, Wayne Dyer, etc. and we just now have a way to explain it scientifically. So let's move on to how to deal with sadness in the short term before we start the process of eradicating it from you altogether. If you watched the last few episodes about regret and worry and anger, you're familiar with our twofold path. The first path is to deal with the negative emotions from a mindful perspective with mindful manipulation that allows us to reduce the effect of the negative emotions, while we work on path 2, breaking one of the 4 components within the emotional influence system where we can stop the creation of negative emotions altogether. So, in the case of sadness and even mild depression, the first path is connected with the critical discipline of letting go. Sadness comes as a result of something that is coming off your ego's list that your mind doesn't want to let go of. But even though your mind is running you most of the time, you can control your mind whenever you want to. You know, there's an old Zen saying, be master of mind rather than mastered by mind. And in this case, you become master of your mind and dictate that it's okay to let go of whatever it is that's getting removed from the ego's list. Grandma died. Okay. She's in a much better place, free of pain and suffering. I enjoyed my moments with her, and now she's gone. Accept that. How much more compassionate can you now be to others who are dealing with this same loss if you're not wallowing in your own self-pity? How much more can you rejoice about Grandma's life immediately? If a relationship ended for you, how much better is it after you get to the acceptance portion of your emotional recovery than all the BS you go through with self-doubt and crying and looking back to analyze what you could have done better or how things could have been different? I mean, how much better is it that the day that you wake up and just let out a big sigh and you realize you've let go of those old ideas of you and you've let go of the relationship and you're now embracing how your life is today with the new idea of you? How much better is it the day that you embrace the new reality? Well, it's awesome until the next time change comes around, of course. And what has happened there, right? On that day of finally being over the sadness is that you've accepted the loss of whatever it was your ego lost. You embrace your newly rebuilt ego. But it's a bad system that's only going to hand you pain and suffering over and over and over again. And there's nothing that says you can't move into acceptance quicker if you move to release whatever is coming off your ego's list willingly. Whatever it is, relationship, grandma, you're fat and you don't want to be, let it go. Let go and let God. If there's something that you can change so that that particular scenario doesn't come up around to bite you again, like your job schedule contributing to a breakup or the extra weight on your body creating a poor self-image, change it. Mindfully manipulate it until we can break one of the components of the emotional influence system and it's no longer a problem. If something is making you sad, get out your ego list from episodes 2 and 8 and figure out what on that list is being devalued from within and try to let that thing go. Embrace the reality and live your new life accordingly. Say to yourself, I cannot change the external forces that have caused this situation, but I can change the internal forces influencing how I deal with this situation. And now that we're far enough into your understanding of emotions, we can start some meditation techniques to help your mind quell the turmoil. If you're being plagued by sadness or even a mild depression, find a quiet place where you can get comfortable. It can be a chair or lying in your bed before you go to sleep or right when you wake up in the morning. And I want you to close your eyes and I want you to start the following process. Take a slow, deep breath. Hold it for a second. Say to yourself, I release all the sadness that is inhibiting my joy. Then let the breath out. You'll feel the sadness leave you a little each time you exhale. Then stop with no air in your lungs and say to yourself, I breathe in acceptance of what is. And you feel the energy of the world and the universe coming to revive you. And do that cycle 10 times. And then after that, take a few moments just to kind of let your mind calm itself. focus on your breath. Don't think of what's going on tomorrow. Don't think of what happened yesterday or earlier today or what TV show you want to watch. Just kind of focus on your breathing. Breathe in, breathe out, and relax. And after you do that for a few days, you'll start to feel better, both emotionally and physically, because studies have shown that meditation can improve your health. And granted, you may have to keep doing this every day or so to get better at it, but do it, because it's a solid path one that helps condition your mind for our second path. And it is critical that we follow through with the second path, because breaking the emotional pain system is the only way to achieve permanent effects. When we break it, you'll lose sadness, and you'll be the master of your mind rather than mastered by your mind. Homework. If you're plagued by sadness, practice our Path 1 exercises. Breathing, positive affirmations. If you're plagued by another negative emotion, like anger or worry or regret, fear, change up the exercise to fit that emotion. I release the worry that has been inhibiting my joy. I breathe in the acceptance of the present moment. And keep doing it. See if it doesn't help you. Email me if it doesn't. Then I want you to check out the audiobook, Awakening Compassion, Meditation Practices for Difficult Times by Pema Chodron. This is a 7-hour audio teaching from an enlightened master that retails for $50, and you can get it free from audible.com by signing up for a 14-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/IamSpirituality. I mean, where else can you get some of the best spiritual teachings in the world from the voice of the enlightened master herself? Nowhere. audibletrial.com/IamSpirituality. If you sign up with them, they help pay for our bandwidth costs. Next, if you have some time, go to the iTunes store and drop us a review. It helps other people find us, and you can assign us up to 5 stars in the review. These aren't the droids you're looking for. 5 stars. Anyway, or you can share on Facebook with your friends. We can only afford word-of-mouth advertising, so whatever you can do, we appreciate it. Twitter, twitter.com/IamSpirituality. Facebook, facebook.com/IamSpirituality. Yeah, we're not very original. Next week, we're going to cover the last individual emotion we're going to discuss before we move on to the other sections of the body, mind, spirit model. Fear. You'll soon understand how fear is created within you so we can stamp it out of your life entirely. I hope these lessons are helping you. Emails are always welcome. See you next week. Peace.